When something becomes deeply meaningful in its deepest sense, what comes alive in one's experience?
Yeah, so boy, you're asking questions that really keep going to the cutting edge of my work. Um, so for me, this question about what is it when people feel deeply connected in this way? And so, and there's two, I always try to keep these two hands together, the functional and the phenomenological. Like
Yes.
what adaptive function is happening to people and what it is it phenomenologically. I think what's happening functionally is when things are deeply meaningful, they have a resonance between their internal and external conditions, and a dynamical system, a self-organizing loop opens up that is affording of them growing their agency, growing their selfhood, growing their personhood. And when you're getting something that is affording at all those levels, right? That is profoundly meaningful. What's happening phenomenologically is people, I mean, you get this. This comes out like when people are on sort of the extreme end of this continuum and they have these transformative experiences and they're really real. They feel a profound calling to transform themselves, to integrate and complexify themselves, so that they can couple to this complexity.
For those who may not have encountered your work or encountering it for the first time, like I did, I
Please.
was a little bit overwhelming because there's so many areas that you talk about and bring together in what you call your ecology of of practices and ideas, which is a great description. But you spent decades exploring cognition and meaning and what you've called the meaning crisis. And people should
Yes.
read this little ditty right here, an
Yeah,
amazing
thank you.
book, and we'll have links below. Um, but you don't just do it as a philosophical issue, John, um, but as something that affects how we perceive and orient and live in the world. And
Yes.
that's something extremely important because most philosophy, most psychological writings are not about that. But you take this whole thing into like an N of one. How can I live in this world? How can
Mm,
I find meaning? How can I use these things? And you bring embodiment into it, which is very important. And that's kind of, my area as well.
right.
Um, and you don't stay at that level of theory. It moves into practice, right? And that practice leads into transformation and how the human being actually changes. I mean, this is what we need. It's like, Jordan Peterson, your friend, talks about the maps of meanings. Well, you have like the map of life, the map of how to be human, the map of how to grow and expand from the inside is super important. But before I dive into like questions about the work and discussion there, I'd like to kind of set a little bit of context from your own life. So, what drew you into this intersection of psychology, philosophy, Tai Chi, and the question of meaning?
Well, I was brought up in a very stringent form of fundamentalist Christianity, and uh, not only my nuclear family, but my extended family on my mother's side. And when I broke from that as a teenager, um, as many people who deconstruct from their family origin faith, like sort of if people have a mother tongue, many people also have a mother religion, and it was my
Indeed.
mother's religion. So you can make what you will of that psychodynamic.
Yeah.
And so when I broke free from that, it launched me into a personal meaning crisis, which I wrestled with uh, quite intensely, had and quite deeply. And then I got to university and I met the figure of Socrates, and that gave me an alternative way. The figure of Socrates gave me an alternative way of satisfying that taste for transcendence, that need for deep connection, that role model of how to cultivate wisdom and virtue and meaning. And and I fell in love. um, very deeply. Socrates is still a pivotal figure in my life. And the problem was academic philosophy very quickly stops talking about wisdom and how to lead a good life. And at least at when I was an undergrad, and it, got enmeshed in very, modern, and by modern I mean created by the European Enlightenment, worries about skepticism and epistemology, and a very narrow conception of ethics as doing the right thing, or whether it was utilitarian or Kantian or something like that. And all of that is valuable. You get important skills of reflecting on science and ethics and art and all those things that academic philosophy can give you. But the longing that I had that was given to me by Socrates wasn't being fulfilled. So literally down the street from where I was living, there was a dojo that taught Tai Chi, meditation, contemplation. And I'd already been reading a bit of Eastern philosophy where I found it was much closer to what I'd seen in Plato. And I took that up. And so I was leading these two lives that were just not integrated at all. This academic philosophy was going on in graduate work. I'm doing all this where I really want to be. And after my MA, I actually dropped out for a year because I just couldn't take that lack of integration,
Yeah.
um, lack of connection. And so, and then I heard about this new discipline, cognitive science, where they were talking about things like meaning and consciousness, and they were very open to deeper ideas, um, and we're very much interdisciplinary the way Plato was. And so I went back and did a second undergraduate degree at an honors level. Because I'd already done all my philosophy, I didn't have to take any philosophy courses. So I was able to take all the psychology courses that you would take also to get a psych degree. And so when I finished that, I went back and did my PhD in philosophy, but on cognitive science. But because of my education, I was capable of teaching also psych, and they started asking me to teach cognitive science and psychology. And then there was a program uh, at the time called Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health. And a good friend of mine, great philosopher and cognitive scientist, Evan Thompson, was supposed to teach a course on Buddhism and cognitive science, and he couldn't do it. And they said, "Well, who else could possibly teach it?" And he said, "Well, John can." And I started teaching that. And around that time, I was also reading Pierre Hadot and Philosophy as a Way of Life. And all this stuff started to come together for me, and I started to realize when I talked about things like wisdom and meaning and transcendence, my students, their eyes would light up. And so I started doing more and more on that, and I started realizing that the meaning crisis wasn't idiosyncratic to me, but I was seeing it in my students. So then I started a large research program of digging into the meaning crisis, and that's what pretty much led to things. One of my students who had gone through my course, that course and my course on the psychology of wisdom, said, "You need to put this online." And my dad's a professional editor. I'm a professional videographer. We have a crew. We'll donate it to you for free. And that became the video series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And then things just exploded after that.
I'm going to put the link for that series and your Silk Road series, and I think you have a new Neoplatonic spirituality series or something as well
After Socrates, yes, after
after
Socrates.
Socrates. And I'll put those all in the show notes below for people um,
Thank you.
to connect onto. They're all just amazing. One thing that in saying that, what I had to listen to, I don't know, 100 of your talks in the last couple of months
Sorry
just to
about that.
wrap. No, it's really amazing. So just to wrap my head around, I knew I wanted to have a conversation with you, but I didn't know how to approach it, like what door to
Mhm.
enter. And I didn't quite fully understand all that you're talking about. And just from your introduction here, there's like already your beginnings and your education are from so many points, right? So, but three names keep coming up, the trifecta of wisdom, basically, in your talks, and it was, Plato, and you say Gautama Buddha and Jesus of Nazareth, if I'm using
Yes,
the names correctly that you use, rather than
yes,
just Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, and
yes.
so, in addition to Plato, how did the I guess the teachings of Jesus and the Buddha also affect a promising bridge toward this meaning for you.
Yeah, well, Plato gave me the thing with Plato is it's a package deal. You get Plato and Socrates. You get the
Right.
figure of Socrates and the dramatic person and the role model, and then you get Plato's brilliant writing and dialogues, and which is a dialogical practice in and of itself, helped to inspire some of the practices I
Yeah.
created. Um, from Gautama, the Buddha, I got, you know, a deep training in meditation and contemplation and how they can be deeply transformative. And I got my first deep taste of a non-substance based ontology, a relational
Mm,
ontology. That the world isn't built out of independently existing objects. The world isn't structured like sentences, like nouns and verbs.
right.
It's structured like an ecology. It's a web. It's a community of relations. And things in relation, and then the things in the relation and the relations co-emerge from something more primordial. And because of where I was learning, I also was deeply taught Taoist practices, Tai Chi Chuan, I Chuan. I did some Bagua, some other things. And so that school, I was actually exposed to the first ecology of practices. I
In
didn't
that
call it
school.
that at the time, but that's what I got, and I'm forever grateful for that. And so um, each one of these people I have dedicated years to trying to emulate. I don't just study their work, I internalize them as a role model, and I aspire to try and see as they did and be as they were. Um, and I go through different periods. Right now, um, because of my upbringing, Jesus had been largely like a largely unconscious figure for me,
Yeah.
and right, but um, and then to some degree, the philosophical Silk Road has really enhanced this. The first pilgrimage. Um, I'm now undertaking. There's a whole slew of books that have come out, and I don't think this is a coincidence, by the way, around something like, you know, the philosophy of Jesus as a way of life, Christian philosophy as a way of life, Soul Whisper, or practicing the way, or the
Right.
philosophy of Jesus, where what's happening is the presentation of Jesus as a philosopher in the Socratic sense, not in the academic sense, is coming to the fore. And I think that's because there's a shift happening in Christianity, at least. I mean, there isn't a Christianity, there are multiple Christianities, but there's a group of people who identify as Christian who are oriented this way because they're trying to feed the need for the cultivation of wisdom that's at the heart of the meaning crisis. And so right now I'm practicing um, um, Jesus very deeply and very, very respectfully. Um, the way I did with Socrates and Buddha, I continue to do it with Socrates and Buddha. It's not a ladder for me. It's like the
Right.
wheel, the eight-spoked wheel you're going around. And from Jesus, I'm learning very, very deeply that there is no logos without agape. There is no agape without logos, and there's no logos and agape without embodiment. The New
Yes.
Testament term is sarx, the flesh, but it's what we would nowadays call embodiment, 4E, cognition, and the relationship that has to forgiveness, not as the excusing of people, but of the breaking of cycles that affords a new possibility of people being together. And then Marshall Davis is having a significant influence on me. He's actually arguing, making a very good case for it exegetically too, that the kingdom of God is actually non-duality, and that's what Jesus is actually trying to get people to realize. Um, and so those are and then how that interacts. And I've got a whole bunch of books comparing Socrates to Jesus and the Buddha to Jesus and the Buddha to Socrates. And I'm trying to get those three figures um, to be as alive to in me and as alive to each other as I possibly can. So um, I guess if I had to put it, Plato gives me the reason part of wisdom, And the Buddha gives me attention and mindfulness. And Jesus gives me the heart, not the emotional center, but that center of orientation and connectedness that is central to one's fundamental orientation and identity.
So let me just see if I understand the meaning crisis a little bit. And please correct, I'm just going to give a brief. It's not just, I mean, it is cultural, it's planet wide, I think,
Yeah.
for everybody. But it's not just cultural or just philosophical, but it's a breakdown, I think, in if I'm understanding you correctly, in how human beings come into contact with reality.
Yes.
Okay. Is that a fair starting point that you
That's a
can?
very fair starting point.
Okay.
That's exactly where the cog sci and the Socratic philosophy and Buddhist philosophy and Christian philosophy land because that sense of connectedness and contact with reality is at the heart of stuff I talk about relevance, realization, and meaning in life, but it's also at, like I said, the heart of what I think these sages are trying to get us to do, to get into a contact, a conformity, an ongoing
Mhm.
transforming, increasing closeness to what is really real. Yes.
Mm. What changed in you through this work? I mean, not just your understanding, of course. I mean, that's grown through your education and your reading and your continuous study, but how you kind of perceive, feel, and participate in the reality.
Oh, a lot. Oh, wow, Mark, that's a really hard question to answer. There's a poverty of riches kind of thing. Um, I guess for me, one of the longest arcs, and it came into prominence last summer when I was doing the first leg of the Philosophical Silk Road. Um, that I've been on a long reconciliation towards the idea of the sacred and sacredness, and how its relationship to ultimate reality, non-duality, but also that non-duality and the depth of the ultimacy of that realness allowed me to realize, with the help of a lot of gifted and people that were gifts to me, that I was still holding on to a deep dualism as a protection against the way the fundamentalist faith had deeply traumatized me and terrorized me, in
Mhm.
which whatever conception I was pursuing, and of course, Buddhism and Taoism and Platonism to a very significant degree reinforce this, and no coincidence why I was attracted to them, which is a starkly impersonal notion of sacredness. And then I realized that the impersonal personal was just another version of the dichotomies given to us by modernity, the inner and the outer, the subjective and the objective, and that I had to break through that. And the work of Mark Wynne gave me a way of understanding the aspect of relating to God in a personal manner, which does not require, and this is where Eastern Orthodox thinkers have been helpful to me, does not require thinking of God as an individualized substance, as some of the Eastern Orthodox thinkers say. God is not an individualized substance. He's not a person the way
Mhm.
you and I are individualized substance things. God's a no thingness in a profound way. And so it's just as true to say that God is not a person as it is to say that God's a person, etc. And that's I was okay with that sort of intellectually, but what happens through Wynn's work was an idea, yeah, but there's a phenomenological door that's only accessible when people he goes through William James's description of people having religious conversion, and one of the things that happens is this flip where people go from perceiving a universe that is a container filled with all these things described by sentences to a face in which the whole, the gestalt, is present in each part, and what's present is a depth beyond what is being presented, like your face is to me right now. And so it's not an adjective, it's not a focal object. It's that everything is. I mean, the word that people often use are glorious, and beautiful, and there's a sense of being faced, and then there's a sense of being called, like the voluntary necessity that's in a good argument. When you face a good argument, you're not, it's not like you're com caused in a compulsive fashion to come to the conclusion. You don't feel like you're being forced. You feel like you're actually exercising your agency when you agree with the conclusion. It's the
Mm.
same thing with beauty. There's a voluntary necessity in it, and love. This is Frankfurt's part. It's his term, a voluntary necessity. I feel bound to sorrow, but I don't feel like I'm losing my agency. I feel like my agency is flourishing. And so God can face us and call to us, and we can find that the space we're in becomes a place, which is, of course, a space with narrative significance. And Wynne talks about that. I'm renewing the senses and faith in place. And I started to realize, um, I guess, like an actual empathy
Mm.
for people who experience ultimate reality in a personal way. It doesn't mean I agree with all of their particular metaphysics. And I don't think any two people really all the way through agree about God. But
How
right,
can we? Yeah.
how can they? Yeah. But what happened is I came to understand that there was a way of relating to the sacred and even to the personal that was not opposed to the impersonal, but that the impersonal, which goes very well with a lot of scientific and philosophical work, with Spinoza, for example, or Neoplatonic tradition. But the impersonal and the personal were different, were like the left and right field of vision, and you look through them stereoscopically to what is beyond them that is, again, um, ineffable but not empty in a Western sense. It's sort of empty in a Buddhist sense.
Right.
It's empty of any substantial thing, but it's not an absence. It's a luminous and profound presence and presencing. Um, and that for me, I guess, um, two things around that. That has afforded my own significant degree of healing from my upbringing, um, and it also led me to start talking about a lot of trying to bring cognitive science to bear on the phenomena of religion, or the phenomena of religion and spirituality, right? Um, and when I did that, I found another huge uptick of interest in my work, both within the university and without the university. And so that has reinforced what I had an intuition was happening in the culture as a response to the meaning crisis, which I call the advent of the sacred, which is that people are being drawn together across discipline lines and tradition lines and community lines, um, in order to try and come to terms, in both senses of that, come to terms with this new sense they have of something deep is missing that they're longing for, and they need to recover it in a profound way. And
Mm.
when they're reaching out like that, it's not just the empty universe filled with things. There's a facing and a calling reaching back to them that is also taking on a life of its own and taking a shape of its own. And
Mm.
so that, and more people that I get to talk to about this, um, are sort of converging on that again across, from people in the sciences and the academic world to people in the martial arts and meditative world, all over the place. One of my favorite examples is not that long ago. Um, I I was on Jonathan Pageau's channel. He's a Canadian Eastern Orthodox icon carver and studier of symbolism. And there's Mike Levin, from Tufts, as a great, cutting edge biologist, and John Vervaeke, the cognitive scientist. And we're all talking about how Neoplatonism seems to be providing us a framework within which we can try and speak together for what this whatever it is that seems to be emerging, but is calling, it's appealing to everybody's attention in a profound way. Sorry, I went on and on, but that's what's uppermost in me right now. So that
Yeah,
question really called a lot out from me.
that's great. And one thing that triggered was a conversation I heard you have about trying to or suggesting um, for the Zen practitioners to embrace Neoplatonism in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, there was a recent discussion I had. I've had two. I had one with Nicole Bodden, who is a Zen.
Yeah,
She runs a Zen monastery and a teaching facility, and we're going to be talking. She's going to accompany me on one of the legs of the philosophical Silk Road to come,
in
Kyoto,
Japan.
talking about Dojin and Nishitani. And then I had one with Ethan Say, good
Yeah,
friend of mine, and I'm about to teach a course on Zen Neoplatonism and how we can set up a dialogical relationship between Zen and Neoplatonism, which will be like when you and I fall into dialogos and we both get to a place we couldn't get to on our own and we couldn't foresee getting to.
yes,
And that is that I'm not trying to create a religion or anything ridiculous like that. My proposal is this is a good way to practice so that we can best apprehend and appreciate and respond to the advent of the sacred. That's my proposal.
nice, very good. Yeah, as an aside, I think in 2009, I developed a training methodology for martial arts called
Yes.
integrated modular training
Yeah.
as a paradigm and method toward mastery. So every module of information you learn, you have to start somewhere with one,
Of
and then
course.
you learn the second module of info, and then those two must be fully integrated. And then
Oh,
you learn a third module, and that must be fully integrated with one and two. And then you learn a fourth module, and
excellent.
that must be fully integrated with one, two, and three. So you're not, and you use the term ecology of practices, but across the
Yes.
practices, in how I see things, it's an ecosystem because you
Yeah,
can't
yes.
have one without the other.
Exactly.
They
That's
become
exactly what I mean by
codependent.
it. That's
Yeah,
exactly what I mean by it. Yeah.
they become codependent. But anyway, enough about me. I just wanted to insert that. But uh, that's very important because, as you know, as a practitioner, okay, Tai Chi, each one is kind of related to Tai Chi.
Yes. Yeah.
It's more at the base of Xing Yi and Da Cheng Chuan and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. Or now they just call Jian Zhuang or standing post. They keep
Yeah, I do that as well. Yeah.
yeah, which is a wonderful practice. And then, of course, Vipassana meditation you practice. So I watched some very early, Marty off my track here. But it doesn't matter. I'm having fun. I watched
Good.
some very earlier videos of you when you were probably in your 30s, maybe. I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
40s.
Yeah.
But, a younger John, and you gave a talk, an introduction to how to meditate.
Yes.
And then you gave a talk on chi without the mysticism,
Yep.
which is that's what we need more of that. Like what is really happening here on these things.
Yeah,
And
that paper is currently in revision, so hopefully it'll get published soon.
oh, okay. And you were kind to send me because I had asked I couldn't get access to it because I don't have a subscription to some of the journals on the flow state.
Yes.
Your two pieces, the published and the previous one
Yep.
on the flow state. And actually that night I spent 6 hours reading it 3 times and writing a 5-page essay reflecting on it.
Oh, wow.
I
Thank you
didn't
for that.
send it anywhere. I figured I'd send it to you after we talk. And when you when you entered the dojo and you've got Tai Chi and I Chuen and meditation, you've got these ecological practices already, this
Right.
ecology of practices rather. What started changing in you by engaging in those several practices at one time that you weren't getting before?
Yeah, so what I started to realize, retrospectively, of course,
Yeah,
when you start doing practices, you get very distracted by the weird phenomenology that happens, right? And you think that, oh, that's the point of the practice, to have the weirdness.
yeah,
Um, Now the weirdness is functional. It signals to your brain that you're putting yourself in. It's an evolutionary marker for you need to learn broadly and deeply, quickly. right? Broadly, deeply, and quickly. It's called, pivotal mental state of
Mhm.
epistemic vulnerability, if you want to use the technical language. Um, uh, and so I don't want to I don't want to like belittle it. It was doing something, but often it's stuff that people point out to you. When I was in grad school, people were saying, "What's going on?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, you're way more balanced in your
Ah,
approach to other people. You're way more flexible. You get into flow more frequently." And I thought, "Oh, that's
okay.
what's coming out of the practice. It's transferring." And then I also started to realize um, that there, like, for example, when you're doing meditation and you're largely zooming in, and you're doing contemplation, and you're largely zooming out, that by and then if you're practicing Tai Chi and you're getting the flow state, what's happening is your brain is getting ready to learn how to flow between
Mm,
those two. And you can feel your capacity for insight, because the zooming in breaks you free from inappropriate frames, and the zooming out opens you up to new possible frames. And if you flow between them, they counterbalance each other. And I was just becoming more insight prone and more flow prone. Um, and that was, and then that was also, I had to learn, I'm still learning how to appropriately relate to that. Because any way in which you experience a kind of enhancement or empowerment, right? Virtuosity can seduce you away from virtue. And so to keep those two together, um, and instead of trying to possess the power. I'm just using these terms as they occurred to me. I don't want to get into arguments with people about whether, like, right. I have to instead stand back and understand, not an attitude of control and taking possession, but an attitude of gratitude for participation.
mhm.
That what's happening, if I really believe the things I say about connectedness and transjectivity, I'm not making, you don't make an insight, you don't make flow. You
Right.
you can cultivate skills and states of mind and traits of character that make it more conducive. But the world, this is Hartmut Rose's work on resonance, the world has to play an irremovable partnership with you in creating these things. And you have to have the right, if you want to keep virtuosity tied to virtue, you have to have the right comportment, that right attitude, the right way in which you're identifying with this, and to avoid wrong ways of identifying with it. So it was
Mm,
both the realization of this kind of empowerment and insight and flow, and watching it spontaneously transfer to an increasing number of domains of my life, and then the challenge of virtuous appropriation of that change. And so and the practices were helping all of that throughout. They were not only the vehicle and the place, they were also the mentor, for going through all of that change. I hope that made
mhm.
sense.
It makes total sense. And it leads me to, I think I had two things, but I may only remember one. The body is like a vessel or cauldron that has to have um, an environment that's conducive within it for these states to emerge.
Yes.
Right. So you were lucky that I think maybe it's luck that you were born with that capacity or you had developed the capacity or your body formed that environment because I know 1,000 Tai Chi practitioners who are arrogant. I'm the only lineage. I'm great. No, Cheng
Yeah, yeah.
Manqing
I,
does it
I,
this way. And it goes totally outside of the practice and into this
I know. I know.
stupidness. Well, it
And they
drives you
give the credit for that.
bonkers. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. You're like, sorry, I'm interrupting you. I
No,
just want to reinforce
yes.
affectively. Yeah, I get tired. I got very tired of the wizards
Yes.
and the egomaniacs, and often fraudulent
Yes.
claims, bullshit claims.
Yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you, but I just want
No,
to really reinforce
that
that.
was totally the point was
Yeah,
I think you're different amongst the practitioners, and there's a group of people like you, that
yeah,
you weren't locked into that ego stance with your Tai Chi or with your meditation or with your whatever, your each one, right?
yeah,
It wasn't, I have the original and I've got the secret teaching and all this BS. It was about the practice.
exactly.
And if you just engage in the practice, these things should emerge because the practice, like you said, is the mentor, it is the teaching, and it's helping to make the soil right for growth. I mean,
And I was lucky because I had the model of Socrates, and then I had the model of the people at the dojo who were teaching me.
yeah,
Um, and that was very, very helpful uh, for that. So I'm grateful for that modeling. Um,
yeah,
you're right, Mark. I've seen so many people go off the rails
right.
in ways that are just as similar to the way they go off the rails with social media or
Oh,
substance abuse or a
mhm.
thousand and one other things. It's like, this is what I mean when I say there is no panacea practice.
Right, right, right. Exactly. Um, when something becomes deeply meaningful in its deepest sense, what comes alive in one's experience?
Yeah. So, boy, you're asking questions that really keep going to the cutting edge of my work. Um, so for me, this question about what is it when people feel deeply connected in this way. And so, and there's two, I always try to keep these two hands together, the functional and the phenomenological. Like
Yes.
what adaptive function is happening to people, and what it is it phenomenologically. I think what's happening functionally is when things are deeply meaningful, they have a resonance between their internal and external conditions, and a dynamical system, a self-organizing loop opens up that is affording of them growing their agency, growing their selfhood, growing their personhood. And when you're getting something that is affording at all those levels, right? That is profoundly meaningful. What's happening phenomenologically is people, I mean, you get this. This comes out like when people are on sort of the extreme end of this continuum and they have these transformative experiences and they're really real. They feel a profound calling to transform themselves, to integrate and complexify themselves, so that they can couple to this complexity. And because what they want to do, think of the metaphors, waking up. You're in a little world of your dream, and you wake up to a bigger world from which you can see the biases and limitations. It doesn't mean that this world doesn't have biases and limitations, but you can at least see those ones, and to that degree you can be liberated. You turn on a light, you were in a dark room and you can't see very much. Now you can see to the bound. And so people get a sense of, right, um, and you use the metaphor spontaneously, deeper. It goes deeper into the engines of their agency, selfhood, and personhood, but they feel like they're going deeper into the very grammar of the world, and they're connected to it in a way that it's like what Plato talked about. The world is more and more disclosing itself, and the beauty and the goodness and the intelligibility and the truth of the world are more and more disclosing itself. And then people feel like they are opening up into this greater reality. And so a lot of my work is to try and get very clear on a good cognitive scientific account that can account for the depths of the functionality and the phenomenology, and like your modules, integrate them deeply together.
Yes. Mm.
It's like, and that was part of the cognitive continuum. Like, and so one state that seems to be that is an exemplifies this, that people can universally get access to, is the flow state.
Right.
And it is a powerful universal. And in psychology, you have to pay attention because people across socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, linguistic, their language use, their culture, their history, their biological environment, the things that normally pull us into difference. People across all of those will describe the flow state in detail using almost synonymous terms, right? And so, wow, it's a genuine, powerful universal. This is
Yes.
Csikszentmihalyi's work. And they will say reliably two things about it. It's an optimal experience. It's one of the most powerfully motivating. They seek it out. They think this is really, really good. And it's optimal performance by, whatever objective standards can be applied. They'll say, I was functioning at my best. That's why artists and athletes all are,
Yeah.
they deliberately seek the flow state. They seek to cultivate it. And in fact, it's predictive of generally how, like, the quantity and the quality, because the where and how you're flowing matter too, because
Mm.
you can flow in ways that don't transfer deeply and broadly, like we talked about earlier. But if you flow frequently, and you flow in a way that does give birth to flow in other domains of your life, it does start to transfer. Um, that's a really strong predictor of how meaningful people will find their lives. And it's not pleasure, because the things that induce the flow state, my stepson and my stepdaughter, they rock climb, which is not a pleasant thing to do. It's hard. You cut yourself, you bruise yourself, you damage yourself. You're high up, so you're part of you is afraid. And then once you get to the top, what do? You come back down. Like, it
Right.
sounds absurd. Um,
Right.
but the reason why they do it is because it reliably gets them into a flow state. I was talking to my stepson about this, because he's a deep devotee. And I'm going to say something, and I'm not speaking it just metaphorically. He does rock climbing religiously. And I said to him, I think rock climbing is your religion. And we talked about it to make sure we were understanding each other. And he said, yeah, you're right. It's my
Mm.
religion. That's right. That's a correct way of describing it. Um,
Interesting.
so uh, we all can taste this. We all have the capacity to taste this, across all the things that divide us. And what happen? Like, what do you see when you're in the flow state? What do people report? They feel radically at one. They
Yes.
feel a diminishment of that narrative ego dominance that's always checking on status and power. That goes silent. They feel like the world is super salient and it's disclosing things to them in ongoing discovery, and it's largely ineffable to them, and it's wonderful, and they feel like they're being changed and transformed, and aspects of themselves that they were unaware of are being disclosed to their awareness. Yeah,
Mm.
that's what it's like, to answer your question.
That's an awesome explanation. And I think part of that occurs because as we're doing the activity to get into that flow state, for that flow state to emerge, a musician, an athlete, even writing, when you're writing, right?
Yeah,
You get into that too. We go into a place of no mind where we're just kind of receiving the information, or they're receiving where to put their hand on the rock, or
yeah.
their own body is being played by, Herbie Hancock once said when he was playing piano, he looked down one day and just saw his fingers moving while he was playing and thought, who the hell's moving those fingers?
That's exactly right. And that's what I meant earlier when I said
And
the
that's that non-dual.
virtuosity. Yes, it's non-dual, exactly. And it's not anything you possess.
Yeah.
You participate in it.
Yes.
You are a porous participator. And it's like you said, it feels like things are being gifted to you. You're sparring, and the block is just there and you just see the opening,
Right.
right? Um, yeah, I agree. I mean, that was part of the thesis of the paper you recently. There's a continuum
Yes.
between insight and flow and mystical experience and transformative experience. Um, and for me, that was a way of giving a clearer articulation. I'll have to ask Nicole if she agrees with this, of the Zen proposal that we're already enlightened. We just don't realize it.
Yeah.
Uh, like we're on the continuum. We are necessarily on the continuum, and we can move along it. And all we need to do is develop the practices that will move us to the place where we realize it in a profound
Yes.
way. But
Yes.
I don't, like I said, I don't know if that's Orthodox Zen, but that was my way of trying to
That's our
bring,
Zen.
yeah, that was my way of trying to bring Zen and cognitive science
Yeah.
together.
The
I,
Sufis talk about the 10,000 veils, and
yes,
having to release and drop and move through each of those veils. And
yes.
in meditation, it's just, letting the images and the thoughts move by and releasing them and allowing them until they disappear in
Yeah.
order to get to that place. Yeah.
And I've been practicing deeply, religiously,
Religiously.
for 35 years.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because what happens is the level of the appearance for me, this is classic Vipassana. Appearances aren't enemies. They're things you look
Right.
through. The way I'm
Yes.
looking through my glasses. I need to see beyond them, but they actually help me get there, right?
Right.
And so what happens is, the appearances get more and more subtle. Like after about, I think it was like 5 or 6 years, all the usual jabbering and all that starts to go. Like if you try and make it go away, you're doomed. But just if
Yeah.
you do the practice, and what happens is that you get into these deeper levels of ways in which your mind is blocking you from participating in that porosity. And
Ferocity. I love it.
yeah, so um, you find, so for me, and that's what we argued in the paper. Meditation gets into a flow state. Now, it's not a metabolically hot flow state; it's a cool flow state. But you're still there because, like, you're tightly coupled. Error matters, and you know what error is. You get distracted, you get locked, you get blocked,
Right.
and you need something like an insight to get through it. And it's the same. And it's the same. And this is why people will say things without paradox, I think intended, that they find these experiences deeply meaningful. But if you ask them, well, can you put into words what that meaning is? They're often very, very taxed. And they'll say things around connectedness or
Mm.
oneness or presence or disclosure, opening up. But, and that's not nothing. But if you try to say, yeah, but like, can you give me more? Nope. It's like, what do you do to have an insight? Well, I do these things. Yeah, but what do you actually? I don't know. I participate
Right.
in it, right? And
That's
it's the
it.
same thing. Yeah.
They allow it and then reap its fruits, right? Reap the
You
fruits of
welcome it. Yeah, you allow it and
welcome it.
welcome it. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the welcoming, the hospitality aspect is becoming more and more sort of central to me too. The idea that you don't just I'm not trying to put words into your mouth or a tone. But for me, it's more than allow because it's like but when you allow people in your home, like the police come to the door and and they allow
Versus
them.
welcome. I see.
Well,
I
yeah,
see.
yeah. And what
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
welcome is, you're disposing things and you're shaping yourself and your environment so that
Yes.
they can fit and belong and have the opportunity to transform and change you.
Nice. I love that word. Thank you. That's again where you take that spiral and you get to a point of more precision.
But
I love it.
that's that I learned that I owe that to Socrates. The
Yeah.
degree to which I can aspire to approximate to him is the degree to which that's what I try to do as much as possible, especially when I'm in dialogue with people.
Yeah. Is relevance realization sufficient to explain this transformation into that flow state?
I think a combination. I mean, I'm working on a really big paper right now. One of the great gifts that's been happening to me recently is that my work on relevance realization has become the focus of a lot of paper. Well,
Yes.
part of the focus, like because other people are working on it. So sorry, that was a little bit too uh, egocentric. But a lot of people are making use of my work on relevance. This has become a hot topic. They're using the term relevance realization. Um, and I'm very grateful for that. I think relevance realization, what I'm working with Dan Chiappi, who's frequently my co-author on some of my most important cognitive scientific work, dear friend, deep thinker, um, crystal clear writer. That's why Dan is almost always, when we write together, he's first author.
Mm.
He is so crystal clear as a writer, um, and careful, but not fussy. Uh, but he gets that sweet spot. Anyways, the what we're doing is we're building a paper that's basically arguing you need an integration of relevance realization, predictive processing, and 4E cog sci as typified by people like my friend Evan Thompson or DePaulo, Gallagher, in which, I think there should be a couple more E's, but the
Right.
traditional four are embodied, embedded, enacted, extended. I think exaptive
Mm.
should be put in there, and I
Hmm.
think emotional should be
Hmm.
put in so people
Hmm.
understand that this is not just cold calculation. So I think that trifecta, that triangle, because part of the argument we're making is no one of them can uh, you can't reduce any of them to the others. They're all irreducible, but they're all also interlocked with each other. And that integration we're proposing gives us our best way of accounting for a wide variety of phenomena that are central to understanding cognition, but also to this conversation, central to understanding meaning, wisdom, mystical experiences, altered states of consciousness, etc. I'm writing a book with Greg Enriquez, making use of his work and all the stuff I do around predictive processing, relevance realization for ecog on consciousness. We've got 7 chapters done.
Nice.
Hopefully, we'll be done this year and it'll come out next year.
Wow. Wonderful. You're so busy. I love it. You're in your flow state,
Well,
you
I
know,
mean,
with this.
that I was talking to Sarah about this, and it's like, um, and this is what I mean about mother religion. At my core, even though I've done all these other things, I'm still a Protestant, right? If I'm
Right.
not working hard, I'm not happy,
It's
right?
that work ethic we have,
Yeah, yeah,
Raised a Protestant, ditched it, more Eastern in my philosophy, but I can't stop working. It's
yeah,
interesting thing.
exactly. And,
Interesting
and
thing.
if you're lucky, and I am, and I get a sense that you are too, the line between work and play dissolves.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. The work we do, it's it's
Privileged to
it's
do it.
our it's pleasurable because it's meaningful to us and we enjoy doing it. It doesn't seem like work. It's just effort, but really it's not effort. It's just a doing, a participating,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
well said.
Yeah. All
And
right.
and to find that other people can catch it,
Yes.
um, that's very meaningful too.
Yes. Um, I want to ask about meaning because you just said something about meaning, but I wanted to just jump quick into a side note of something that annoys me with neuroscientists when
Sure.
they're trying to explain mystical experience and mysticism and et cetera, et cetera. They always go to the scans or and
Hmm.
say, well, this is what's happening. And, it's not really mystical. It's all in the brain, and this is what's happening in the brain. And it's like, well, what does that have to do? You're just telling me what's happening. You're not telling me what's changing and why, or you tell me where it's coming from. But it's to me, that's totally irrelevant to those experiences and embracing and living through them or living with them.
Yeah, I want to respond a little bit in depth on that because it's very
Yeah,
important.
please.
But first, I want to say that, I mean, you're speaking to a dominant but not an exclusive club of neuroscientists. There are a lot of neuroscientists who don't want to talk that
Okay,
way, and I get to work with them, and they're bona
great.
fide and they're accredited. They're right. So I just I do want to say that
Yeah.
that it's critics of this call it neurocentrism, or some people call it neuroreductionism.
Yes.
Uh, and of course, you can start to see the problematic place it gets you right away when they say, well, it's just, there's nothing mystical going on there because it's just these events happening in the brain. And then I say, oh, and when you're doing your science, there's nothing scientific going on there because it's just neuro events happening in your brain, right?
Right.
And they go, well, no, those neural events are allowing me to know and understand the world. And I'd say, oh, so we're not just talking about the events, we're talking about their function. And and the function is bound up with the phenomenology, yes?
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
maybe there are functions, right, and phenomenology that you can't explain at the neural level any more than you could understand what chess is by doing a chemical analysis of the pieces, right?
Right.
You
Yes.
you have to understand. So if we're talking about the function and the phenomenology, let's talk about the function and the phenomenology. And the function and the phenomenology are not located in the brain. They are fundamentally between the embodied brain and the world. Um, a- and and more and more people are we argued for that in the paper you read, are moving towards understanding that if we really want to explain what it is to know or to solve problems, let's just do that for a sec. Okay, where's a problem? Where is a problem merely in you as a subjective event? No, because if you don't solve it, it could kill you. Is it just an objective feature of the world? No, the world doesn't have problems objectively. It's between you and the world. It's just, do you and the world fit together? Like adaptivity, like relevance realization, like evolution. And it's like, oh, it's the fittedness, right? And then you say, oh, well, if that's the function, how isn't is it an adaptive function? Yeah. Oh, well, and do you think it might have an evolutionary motivation attached to it phenomenologically? Yeah, yeah. Well, maybe that's like what people are talking about in meaning and connectedness that's getting enriched in these mystical experiences. And maybe that enriched phenomenology points to the function is being enriched or empowered in some way. Is that at least something you should consider as an empirical possibility and seek to gather empirical evidence and theoretical argument for it? That's my response. Um, and more people, to be fair to the people I'm criticizing, are responding to those criticisms and taking them seriously. I,
Okay.
I mean, and then final point on this, the work of Michael Anderson, and he is going to be very famous. The attempt to locate a one-to-one mapping between function and brain location, that's moribund. That's dead. It's not the case. There is no one-to-one mapping between location and function. All locations do multiple functions, and functions can be found in multiple locations, and many of them shift around. Like the the attempt to find the neural correlate of consciousness, the attempt to find the anatomical thing has bankrupt. There is no
Right.
place, and it can like and people are trying to look for a functional like pattern of connectivity and firing, right, as the locus in the brain of consciousness. So the whole thing is based on a very non-sustainable epistemological and ontological and ultimately actually even neuroscientific framework, because the neuroscience is undermining the attempt to be a cartographer of
Yeah.
cognition, right?
Right.
That's an insufficient. Um, does location sometimes help? Yes, it is a piece of evidence that should be put into uh, the framework with all other kinds of evidence and not given some special privilege. And we know that people overprivilege this stuff. You can take things that have been refused publication and then put in fMRI photos and change nothing else, resubmit to it, and you'll get it published, even though you have changed nothing of
Yeah.
the theoretical content or empirical data. And so we have to stop this picturing fixation that we have and this reductive idea that I can somehow, it's the substance thing. It's right there. I can point to the thing that is X. Right? It doesn't work
Mm.
that way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to go on
No,
that
that
depth
was
because I mean, it bothered you. It irks me because it 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 irks me, I think, I hope virtuously, because to my mind, this is actually thwarting the science, not affording the science.
yes. Yes. Let's talk about the meaning of purpose. Many people place that in goals,
Yep.
orientations, what they want, but I think your work points toward orientation
Yeah.
orientation toward reality. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, because I mean, there's a long argument here, so I'll be brief, but hopefully it'll be intuitive. The idea is, um, if you try to understand meaning as like a goal, and you're in the telic mode,
Mm,
the telic mode means everything is for the sake of that
okay.
X. You face two problems. One is the practical problem, and I actually I remember realizing this in high school, and it really shook me
Mm,
because I thought, well, if I reach my purpose, then I don't have a purpose anymore.
yeah.
And I was like, but if I don't reach it, my life was futile and a waste.
Oh boy.
And it's like, oh, and then also, which I would now say now, and I didn't have the wherewithal to say it then, the means, because I was ignorant, was, but that's not the mode of development. That's the having mode. That's not the being mode. And meaning is
Mhm,
part of a being. It's part of the being mode. It's we don't satisfy it by controlling or consuming things. We satisfy it by growing and developing and maturing. So that's the difference between having food and becoming wise or becoming virtuous, right?
mhm,
And so when you can talk about purpose that can condemn you to a modal confusion, you're trying to pursue something that is about your being through a having mentality. And if you understand it as goal, you're condemning yourself to meaninglessness. Because if you don't reach it, your life was futile. And if you reach it, you're suddenly meaningless. Um, I don't think ultimately that's what people want to be communicating when they talk about purpose. One more thing I should mention: purpose is only one of the dimensions that even psychologists talk about meaning, right? There's coherence and there's significance and mattering. And it looks like, I would argue, it looks like significance and mattering are going to collapse into each other. And
mhm,
uh, I think coherence does too, but I won't go into that. Mattering is this sense of being connected to something larger than yourself, right? Um, but I think what people mean by purpose is exactly, am I oriented in a way that matters? Am I oriented? And here it's not a goal. It's so John Keeks makes a distinction. He's a great philosopher, between goals and ideals. A goal is like a thing, a place, a state you're trying to get to. Um, whereas an ideal is, it's adverbial. It's a way you're constantly trying to be.
mhm,
Um, so if we're speaking technically using his distinction, I don't have a goal of becoming honest because I can't ever finish that.
right.
But I have an ideal of
I see.
always maturing into more and more honesty. Um, and so I think what people mean is they want to find an orientation that matures them, where maturation, and this is where I'm deeply influenced by Plato and John Russin and my somebody I've had the great privilege of becoming friends with, William Desmond,
Mm,
just a titanically brilliant person. Maturity means, think about the language we use when we think somebody's being immature. They're not facing up to reality. They're being too egocentric.
mhm,
So what people mean is, when they have a purpose, is they have an orientation that will mature them beyond egocentrism and get them more oriented to what is more real and what really
mhm,
matters. And I think that's what they're talking about. But because we use this word purpose, and it can mean a goal state, and it can put us in the telic mode, it is deeply confusing to a lot of people, and our culture often presents confusing information about what it is people are seeking. Like, and so people think, if, for example, if I get X amount of wealth, that, right, and it's like, that actually doesn't predict subjective well-being. Well, I want to pick subjective well-being. Well, subjective well-being doesn't actually predict meaning in life. Um, have a kid, your subjective well-being and your finances both collapse, but people have kids because, right, they feel like they're oriented to something non-egocentrically, and they have to grow up in order to be connected to this reality that they are confronted with. They have to participate in its realization. Um, and so um, that's why I'm very cautious around this language of purpose. I don't want to forbid people from using it, but I generally talk more about orientation, connectedness, maturation instead
Mm,
of purpose.
okay. Does salience and resonance play into that?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I think what coherence, but the coherence, first of all, just empirically, it's received mixed empirical results.
Mm,
Uh, the idea that like just sort of explanatory coherence. I think intelligibility matters, but what I think is going on there is like that you don't find uh, think you aren't your salience isn't dysregulated. It's not causing a perspectival clash between like a third person point of view and a personal that's causing you to have a sense of absurdity. Like this seems so meaningful to me, but from the cosmos's perspective, it's meaningless. Like, and so I think salience and resonance are better terms when what we're finding salient is putting us into a state of resonance. Well, what's Rosa's main way of describing resonance? Resonance is when you're on this sweet spot between control and uncontrollability. He has a golden little book. He has this big, thick book, Resonance, and he has this golden little book called The Uncontrollability of the World. You turn a corner, and unexpectedly, you see a sunset, and you have to behold it. It's that voluntary necessity again. And it's not serving any purpose, but you have to behold it. And it's because there's this mixture between you can participate in it. You're not overwhelmed like horror, but you don't control it. You can't consume it. You can't absorb it into your subjectivity. So it can call you beyond the prison of your ego for a moment
mm,
and show you how reality is more. Iris Murdoch said, when we love something, love is the painful recognition that something other than yourself is real. And you have a moment where you're loving the world and that resonance. So I think when our salience landscaping disposes us into moments of resonance and flow, um, then I think that right is what is meant by intelligibility. It's more like the discovered intelligibility of insight than the found intelligibility of like a picture that is familiar to you or something like that.
mm. And I think that you said that or suggested that resonance can become reverence at depth.
Oh, so one of my I guess it's a slogan, is that what we're trying to do is exapt. So exapt is to repurpose. My
Okay.
tongue has been exapted for speech. Tongues
Ah,
didn't originally evolve for speech. That's why many organisms have tongues, but they don't speak. So exaptation, that's why I want to make it one of the E's. Your brain is constantly taking stuff from the sensory motor domain and repurposing it for the cognitive domain and the spiritual existential domain. Right. And
nice.
see what my hands are doing that to show you that. I'm
Yes.
actually doing it. I'm taking a sensory motor movement to try and convey something, spiritual and
Gesture.
existential, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
a- and and so yeah, I do think. Sorry, I lost the thread of the question. What was your question again?
Oh, I think it was about how you said that resonance can become
Yeah,
reverent at
exactly,
depth.
exactly. So that, and I got sidetracked in explaining acceptation because I need to use it.
Yeah.
We need to be able to exact relevance realization into resonance realization. Relevance realization is you're doing it all the time, largely unconsciously. You'll have some moments where you become aware of it, like, oh, I thought she was angry, but it turns out she's afraid. And your whole salience landscape shifts and different aspects are
Mm,
foregrounded, backgrounded, and things sort of move around, just like I was moving my body, but they're not really moving, but we use movement language. But what can happen is you can get a kind of insight that isn't specific to a problem. It's not located here. I
mm,
turn the corner and I get an insight into how I could be in the world. I get
mm,
resonance and I start to get resonance realization. My relevance realization is now exapted into resonance realization flow, right? And that can turn into reverence realization. I can realize that the really real is ultimate and ultimately beyond me, but also within me. So the resonance can open me up to something other than myself is real. And then that can conduce me to reverence because I realize that that reality is far deeper and more affording than I had previously
Hmm.
realized. And I start to realize, oh, I hadn't, like when we talked about earlier, that moment when I'm in resonance with my world and it goes from being the universal container to being the present facing that is calling me into a mysterious depth. That's reverence realization.
Yeah. Wow. And I would imagine that speaks to a different mode of participating in the world.
Oh yeah. So what? I mean, we've got a Hussein and I, my co-authors on the flow paper, and Daniel and I, uh, we have a paper in revision right now on the four kinds of knowing, and that um, you start at the participatory, and you sort of go through into the perspectival into the procedural into the propositional, but then you go from this sort of pre-reflective, if I can use phenomenological language,
Hmm.
participation, which is ultimately what everything else is resting on, into a post-reflective
Huh.
awareness of of participation, and you go from um, uh, the Christian tradition does this. They talk about you're the image of God, the image of reality. And so you've got this way which you're coupled and participating. Reality is not out there; it's out there, in there, and between, right? Um, um, but you go from that largely unconscious uh, being the image of to the conscious, right? And often altered, hyper conscious, right? Likeness of. You go
Hmm.
from the image of God to the likeness of God, where what it means is you're actually participating with awareness um, in ultimate reality, sacredness,
How
the
do these
Tao or Shunyata, right?
Yes, 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 yes. How do these different modes of knowing, I think is propositional, procedural, uh, perspectival, right, and participatory, how do they
Yeah.
function, or how do they come together in a well-functioning human being? Or how should they come
Well,
together?
this is part of the meaning crisis because part of what I claim is that the meaning, one of our cultural framework, the dichotomies created by modernity, uh, the horizontal modernity was born right from this idea that the vertical dichotomy between the natural and the sub and the supernatural is absurd, and it makes no sense because we can't explain how they connect and how they communicate and how they could be causally related. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just abandon that. The problem is, it's doing a lot of important work for you. It's helping to explain the appearance reality distinction, how normativity works, how meaning works. So you can't just give up all those functions. So what did we do? What we do is we introduce a horizontal
Hmm.
dualism and dichotomy. There's the subjective and the objective, the inner and the outer, the value and the facts, the is and the ought, the meaning and the measurement. And oh yeah, 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 the mind and the body and all that, and how do they communicate and interact? Oh well, right. And so, right, that's just as absurd. And the problem with that is that dichotomy has tended to cut us off from the kinds of knowing. They're still functioning, but we can't own them and appreciate them because we have a cultural framework, a cultural
Hmm.
grammar that gets into our very cognition that largely, right, puts them out of awareness and recognition. And it tells us that all there is to knowing is knowing that. And then you state a proposition that is
Right.
somehow about an objective fact. But of course, if you ask people what facts are, how much do they weigh? It's like, well,
Right.
what? Oh, a fact is actually a relationship between an internal sentence and an external state and then how do you do all that? And then you realize that the dichotomy dissolves, right? It just dissolves in a profound way. And so it's important to understand that the propositional tyranny and the forgetting of the non-propositional kinds of knowing is an important symptom of the meaning crisis. So although they're functioning, they have to be, or we can't be here. And I'll articulate that in a sec.
Yeah.
There's a sense in which one of the central claims of the meaning crisis is they are largely malfunctioning with respect to, right, the education and the appreciation and the apprehension of meaning. So participatory knowing, well, let's start where people are familiar.
Propositional.
Propositional knowing. To know is to believe, and it's to have justified beliefs that are true of the world. And when you ask where true is and where the normativity of justification is, you shh, be quiet. But anyways, let's keep going. And then the idea is um, that is stored in a particular kind of memory, semantic memory, where you store the fact that cats are mammals. And this gives you, this is largely designed to pick up on invariant features of your world, either because they're nomological or they're fixed in the past. Um, Nomological, law-like, invariant across many contexts. Um, and you have a sense of that being real, which is the conviction that it's true, right? But that's knowing that. But your knowing that actually depends on you knowing how to do a lot of things, like
Yeah.
zero in on a particular part of the world that you're going to make your statements about and finding the relevant statement from all of your memory. You have to know how to do all that relevance realization in order to state the proposition. So you have to have a whole bunch of skills of attention and noticing and reflection and remembering and categorization, etc. There's a lot of know-how, and knowing how doesn't give you beliefs, it gives you skills. And your skills aren't true or false. They apply or not. They're powerful or not. And they're not stored in semantic memory. They're stored in a different kind of memory, procedural memory. But in order to acquire or apply a skill, I have to know what it's like. I have to know
Mm.
what it's like to be me here now in this situation with the kinds of things that are salient to me that I'm foregrounding and backgrounding. Because if I'm going to be sparring, I have to know what it's like to get it right.
So
I have to know what it's like to
participatory experience, I think, right?
well, but this is yeah,
Or-
but this is the perspectival knowing because
Oh,
this
okay.
is knowing by having a particular state of consciousness that
Mm,
is self-organizing in such a way that it presents the world to you and you to the world within a perspective in
mm,
which you have a right you're centered and placed and you are oriented and you are alerted and things are foregrounded and backgrounded and you're adjusting the level of all the stuff that goes in when we say try to take Mark's perspective on a situation. We don't
yeah,
say do Mark's skills or
right.
state the same beliefs as Mark does. We're saying try to see the world the way and
Yes.
we're using sight as a metaphor. That's perspectival knowing.
Uh,
But your ability to be here now depends on the deepest kind of knowing. And this is part of the 4E revolution in cognosci and also the what's called the externalist revolution in epistemology. You don't have to know that you know in order to know.
okay.
Now that because
Yeah.
the problem with that is if you have to so in order to know A, I have to know that I know A. I
Yes.
get an infinite regress, which is skepticism. So it has to terminate in something. And the attempt to find foundations, things that were self-evidently true, has collapsed as a project.
Mm,
Foundationalism is a collapsed project. And so instead, and this was the work of Goldstein and others, right? You get an externalist thing is you can know without knowing that you know.
hmm
And what justifies your knowing isn't any right propositions you bring to bear. It's certain features of reliability, right? And so when my participatory knowing is the way in which the world and myself shape each other in niche construction. So I'm reliably coupled to the world, connected to the world, so that my consciousness can fit and my skills can be applied. And from that, I can gather the evidence and form the beliefs that I need to form. And that's your participatory knowing. Your sense of it being real is your sense of connectedness, belonging, meaning. You're you it doesn't result in beliefs or skills or states of mind. It results in traits of character, the way in which your identity is formed in order to conform you to the world. And it's that kind of knowing, right? Knowing by how your identity conforms you to the world. What Chris and I call the agent arena relationship. Um, and it has its own kind of weird memory. It's yourself, that weird kind of memory we call ourself, the through line we
Yeah.
draw between all our beliefs and our skills and our states and our traits, uh, to try and hold it all together in how we assume our identity and assign identities on an ongoing basis.
Mm. Wow. That's deep.
And the point is that modernity has not only reduced everything and tried to flatten our
Yes.
ontology, it's reduced our epistemology and told us the only kind of knowing is propositional knowing, and you don't have to transform like you have to like in your skills and your perspectives and your character in order to get truth. You just need a universal method for computing over your propositions, and that will give you access to all the knowledge that can be had. And when
Mm.
you and if you adopt that framework, then you have now cut yourself off from the very things that make your agency, your selfhood, and your personhood and their meaningful connection to the world unavailable to you.
Mm.
That's a meaning crisis.
Yeah.
And you
You,
won't experience it as, you might not necessarily experience it as profound meaninglessness. Some people do, and they suffer horribly, right? Or loneliness or mental health problems. You might experience it through a displacement, in which you treat something as if it is of a sacred or religious value, and you try to exercise your non-propositional knowing. So you dress up like your favorite character from the MCU and go to Comic-Con,
that's
for
right.
example, or you are convinced this is a very typical pattern for people who deconstruct from an institutional religion. You take up a religious identity within your particular political ideology.
Hmm.
That can be so dangerous. We tried that. We let that go unmoored in the 20th century, and it drenched the world in titanic amounts of blood. So the meaning crisis, that like the being cut off from that, doesn't just mean that people are kind of moping around. It has huge ramifications and consequences because it has a whole continuum of symptoms. There are positive symptoms. The revival of people like yourself trying to bring back wisdom traditions, meaning traditions, practices, states of mind, traits of character. The revival of Stoicism, the Neoplatonic revival that's going on right now, the mindfulness revolution, all of the psychedelic revolution, Renaissance, these are all positive symptoms of people are going, nope, something is radically missing, and I've got to get it back.
What has to change in a person before the meaning becomes something lived?
Well, I mean, I think there has to be, to some degree, now it can be very implicit and intuitive, but there has to be some degree of disidentifying from modernity. And again, by
Right.
modernity, I don't mean currency. I mean that particular framework, all those horizontal dichotomies and the propositional tyranny and the idea that cognition is computation done by your brain. That whole picture, people, like many people try to explicitly disidentify with it, and some of it's very healthy. They're philosophically and scientifically astute. Some of it can be very unhealthy. There's very kinds of rabbit holes that people go down in New Age movements where they, or kind of decadent romanticism, where they disidentify from modernity, but in ways that are not helpful to the cultivation of wisdom and meaning. Um, so, for example, and this is one of my criticisms. Arjun Arora and I have made this in a video essay, even of the psychology, because the psychology, the construct of meaning in life that the psychology is using, is largely a mirror of the shared cultural notion, where we think of meaning as i- right, as a personal, private, preferential possession. It's my meaning. And this is
Mm.
a ridiculous proposal. Uh, Meaning, I mean, Wittgenstein, Heidegger, right, Merleau-Ponty, right? Meaning has to be shareable with others for it to be meaning,
Mm. Right.
right? And it has to be, right? Meaning is a normative. It has a normative dimension. It's not just your preferences. You have to be correctable. Other people get to shape, and you get to shape what makes things meaningful. Right? When I say your life is meaningful, I'm not merely describing it, I'm praising it. I'm
Mm.
recommending other people to do what you're doing, right? And so how do we regulate? There's not, it doesn't make any sense to say my norms are just my preferences. Norms are things that can challenge your preferences and show you how they are wrong, right?
Yes.
And so even that notion that it's my meaning. Well, do you really believe that? Tell me, do you really believe that after COVID, when you were thrown back into just you and your own private meaning, how well did that go for you? How well did that go for you? Okay. And so this is what I mean. People have to, and COVID did this for a lot of people. They woke up to, wait, there's something radically mistaken and missing from the framework that I'm living in. And I think that's the moment when people realize that meaning is something that they have to transform, to realize they have to cultivate in order to participate in it. And that's what I think starts to and I think, and part of the advent of the sacred is more and more people are waking up in this way, more and more and more and more. And I don't mean because they've seen my work or read my work, just more and more people. Many people use the term the meaning crisis and they don't even know that I coined it,
Yeah.
right? Um, and that speaks to the fact that it speaks to something that's going on for them, often incoherently, intuitively, implicitly.
Hmm.
Uh,
Are there,
but I
oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I'm sorry. No, no.
I just wanted to say that's what I think has to happen. I think people have to wake up from
Yeah.
modernity. Uh,
And I think it's happening, like you said, in COVID, it was a big shift that maybe
Yep.
the universe, the great consciousness of everything needed to do to help the world shift, to help us shift a little bit. You know, who knows?
and I think also people are becoming aware, because the data seems to be supporting this, of the toxicity to meaning
Yeah.
of social media, which claim to
Oh,
connect us and doesn't, and now increasingly chatbots.
yeah.
And the evidence is mounting, right? They shut off brain function, they make you more delusional. Like that recent MIT study, when people even trained in Bayesian thinking, and they interact with their chatbots, and they become more delusional. They can trigger psychosis. They erode your moral character. They degrade your like using a chatbot is the cognitive equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes while you're all alone.
Hmm.
It's sort of mixing loneliness and smoking. That's what you're doing to you. Smoking gives you a burst of working memory, and loneliness, right? Solitude before it becomes loneliness can give you that initial space you need to reflect. But if they are extended, right, and you identify with them, the smoking and the loneliness will kill you, literally kill
Hmm.
you.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yeah.
and so I think social media, and the weird monstrous hybridization between social media and the LLMs, the large language models, the chatbots, has also made people aware, because what we're seeing people pulling away from social media and pulling away from the use of chatbots. Like it's actually, and so um, I think a lot of people are waking up to the toxicity of these media and these machines, and that's also provoking them to, well, what is it that, right? Here's the thing about the LLMs, right? They are propositional tyranny incarnate.
Hmm.
That's what they are. And
Yes.
when people wake up to their toxicity, they start to open up again, often intuitively, implicitly, to looking for non-propositional ways of knowing and connecting.
Yes. 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 Are there irreversible shifts that happened in real transformation in a person?
That's one of those that's a really profound question, and it's profound. I call it Plato's problem because Plato wrestles with it.
Mm,
Um, but I mean, so the Plato's problem is Alcibiades. Here's somebody who's beautiful, brilliant, deeply attracted to Socrates, gets to spend all kinds of time with Socrates, and becomes the supervillain of ancient Athens. Or you have Judas, who's with Jesus and betrays Jesus, right? Um, and the Buddha has a cousin that, like, this is a trope, in fact. Why is it then people can have all the abilities, all the opportunity, um, and all the role models and teachers that one could possibly ask for, and they still go down the dark
right,
path,
right.
right? Uh, and it's like there's something that we can't. There's it's the resonance. There's something uncontrollable at the heart of genuine transformation
Mm,
that precludes us from ever trying to engineer or mechanize it. And I think, therefore, if I were to try and conclude that there are irreversible changes, I would not feel comfortable claiming that unless I was claiming it from, like, that I that from an engineering mechanization. So, like, this is why it
yeah,
has to be this way,
right.
and I don't think that's fundamentally the case. I mean, I think when, like, the Buddha or Jesus or Socrates, right, the people that are enlightened, they I don't know if you're it, so there's a phenomena well studied called metastability, which is in dynamical systems have many different states where they can stably be. And they're at different levels of complexification. And so a system is metastable, and human beings are clearly metastable. And so you could push on somebody, right, into probably the ultimate metastable state, something like enlightenment. Um, so it is highly probable they'll stay in that state. I don't know if that means you couldn't do horrible things to them that force them down
Right.
uh, that. Um, I imagine that the higher up you go, the more difficult it would be to drag somebody down. But
Mm,
um,
yeah.
I don't want, I guess, I don't want to sound ominous, but I don't want to. I don't want to claim that there's such an absolute limit on evil, and its capacity to corrupt a human being, even
Yeah.
an enlightened person.
Yeah.
Um, so we could, the best we should do in order to be careful is to speak about probabilities. I think enlightened people are very probably going to stay in that state, but
Okay.
I don't think it's
Fair.
impossible, if you're asking me to make a judgment, that they couldn't co- be forced back. They're put into 10 years of unremitting civil war, and they see horrible atrocities and they're starving. I don't know. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. That's a fair answer and I think an honest one. Yeah. So in speaking of transformation, things need to be destabilized, right? They have to break down
Oh, yeah,
old
obviously. Yep.
structures before we
Yep.
can reassemble, reorganize, and move. Why can't we just go from this stable state to a transformed state without breaking this down first?
Sure. Because the very things that make you adaptive make you prone to self-deception, which
Mm.
means one of your adaptive traits is that your cognition is inherently self-organizing. That's what happens in an insight, right? It
Ah,
self-organizes. Your consciousness is self-organizing. Your biology is self-organizing. You're not
yes.
running your biology. You participate in it, right?
Yes.
And it's not just self-organizing, it's autopoietic. It's self-organized in such a way that it reliably seeks those conditions that produce, protect, and promote it, right? And what that means is when you're in a state, it has that adaptive capacity to resist being destroyed. So we, like Leo and I talked about this in the paper we wrote on the cognitive science of wisdom. You get these, you can get patterns of things that are individually adaptive running off self-organization that's adaptive, but they constellate in a way that's maladaptive. So,
Mm.
here's a bad event that just happened. I'm going to try and understand what's the likelihood there's going to be another event like that. Uh, well, how easily can I imagine an event like that? Well, because one just happened, I can easily imagine it.
Right.
That's the availability heuristic bias, right? And it's really stark in my memory right now, so it really stands out. So that's the representation bias. And then because I'm in that state of what's called encoding specificity, I'm much more likely to remember previous sad states, right, and bad states than good ones. And then that reinforces it. And then that starts to trigger the confirmation bias that starts to look for more and more evidence that confirms it. And as that gets confirmed, I start to get more and more anxious. And as I get anxious, I start to lose cognitive flexibility and I start to screw up and I start to do a self-fulfilling prophecy. Bad stuff starts happening and I go, look, I was right. And each one of those things, each one of the components and the overall dynamical self-organization is highly adaptive, but that thing takes on a life of its own and it sucks life from you. So even when you're doing I thought she was angry. You're locked in. And this
Right.
state has like this adaptive inertia to it. It resists being broken, it resists being changed, right? And so you have to do things to break it because it has these adaptive functions to it. And mere and because look, like when you have like this, like an anxiety spiral, right?
Yeah.
Like I just described, if you try to intervene and change it in any one place, the rest of the system just adapts around it and reconfigures itself. You
Indeed.
need something that is a counteractive dynamical system, something that can intervene on it in parallel, in multiple places, in multiple different ways at the same time. You need you need a counteractive dynamical system like the eight-spoked wheel, the eightfold path, right? Or the ecology of practices found within Neoplatonism or Christianity or Judaism, right? That's what religions do. They provide these comprehensive ecologies of practices that break us out of the deepest block. We can do things with our attention and a little bit with playing with our identity when we're locked into a particular problem. Oh, she's afraid, she's not angry.
Mm.
Eh, But we still have to do things to break it. But to break the big things, we need something really big to break it. And that's what people also don't understand that the atomic individualism of North American and European society, but especially North American, right? And the self-help and just plugs into the autodidactic fallacy and people think I can do it. Actually, you can't. And that's not to dispirit you. It's to get you to become more mature and wake up. Um, like you can't. You need something much bigger than a couple sets of skills that you have. And you need role models because it's perspectival and participatory, not just procedural and propositional. Sorry, I'll stop. I could go on and on about this, but
No, it's fascinating. I love to listen. I love to listen and learn. I want to ask you one more question about transformation. Um, it goes back to the start of the conversation about having an environment that allows you
yep,
to
yep,
transform.
yep.
But um, and that transformation can happen. It can take years, decades, or it can be instantaneous, like Ramana Maharshi at 16 becoming self-realized at his father's death. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm a that phenomenologically, I don't doubt. I'm not calling him a liar. Please
yeah, yep,
misunderstand me.
yep.
But when you do when you do more careful research on these people, there's been years and years and years
Mm.
of multiple things they've been doing that are often self-organizing below their awareness in
Ah,
order to afford that happening. Um, in fact,
right.
what's really interesting, and this has got a really cool cognitive scientific angle to it. Um, so one of the things that helps when you're locked is notice invariance, which means it's a notice invariance heuristic. This is Kaplan and Simon, right? Um, so I didn't solve this problem. I reframe it. I still don't solve it. I reframe it. I still don't. Try to find what you're not changing between your frames
Yeah,
because that you're really holding on to and it's really backgrounded because that's likely what's thwarting you.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, now that in and of itself is cool. That requires humility. But
It does.
further experiments showed, is this Gary and Gick? I can't remember which one it is. Um, if I'm in this, so I'm in this current situation, right? And I'm failing. I need an insight and I can't get it. I need to really open up, right? I can't get it. The things that help me are actually to remember my past failures because that
Mm.
allows me to run through and find the notice and variance heuristic. So if I'm humble enough and I keep track of my failures, which you'll see in a lot of these people before. They've got these autobiographies of their failures
Right.
before. That actually, and they're humble about it, that actually affords, right, a powerful insight.
So that's like the overnight success that took 30 years,
It's like the
before that
Beatles,
overnight success.
the
The
Beatles.
environment was being set, the framework, the mind, the thought, the perception, the feeling, the struggles,
You
all
want to
before the event.
I want to give these people credit, right? They
Yeah,
were courageous to go into the situations that made them fail. They were humble enough to keep remember it. They have powerful enough cognitive flexibility and memory to find the through line, even just implicitly, and afford the insight. I'm not trying to take away credit, but I don't think it's just like I know this kind of heresy for Zen, right? I don't deny the phenomenology of sudden enlightenment. I do deny the functionality of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think
Okay.
there's been a long functionality, and often it's not seen as functional. And I try to explain it because it's just a series of failures.
Right.
How could all of those failures have produced enlightenment? It's actually a series of failures that is taken up with the right kind of right awareness and humility can actually give birth to the most profound insight.
Right. So, but there's a difference there in someone sitting in Zazen for 3 decades to become self-aware, right?
Yeah,
And self-realized, and someone like you're describing, where there's been this whole history of
yep, that's
these
right.
things happening that it takes a moment to reorganize and shift and transform.
Totally. Totally. And again, um, there's no panacea practice, there's no panacea pathway,
Right.
right? And I
Right.
think some people, um, and it's a very important question, and I don't have an answer for it as to
Yeah.
why. Some people, they can just, they're like, many people combine them. Dogen both did the journey and did the deep sitting, right?
Yep.
Dogen did
Yep.
both,
Dogen, yep.
right? And Siddhartha did both. Gautama did both. He did all, and then right, right. But there are stories of that contrast between people who, as you say, practiced for 30 years, and people that didn't seem to be practicing or doing other things,
Yeah.
um, and get it. And to me, that speaks to again, and I think this is one of the insights of Mahayana over Theravada, is that we can't be parochial about the pathway
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
wisdom and enlightenment.
Yeah. 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 Don't praise the path, right? And
Yeah,
don't be held back by the path.
because
Yeah.
you're going to find a lot of variation on the paths.
Hmm. Indeed. John Vervaeke, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I tell you, it's been inspiring and I've learned a lot. I enjoy talking with you, and that you've given me so much of your time today and shared so much of your work with me. It's a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation. I'm happy to come back and continue. Uh,
Wonderful.
so thank you very much.
You're welcome.